Hi, everyone, and welcome to Elevate Your Life on Dr. T TV. I'm Dr. T, and this is the place where emotionally sensitive, highly driven people get the emotional tools that they need to succeed. Now, with me today is an amazing guest, and I'm so excited to just learn so much from her today. And our guest is Melissa Schwartz, who was born an intense, sensitive, empathic power seeker. I love it already. Her intuitive ability to decode misbehavior and her passion for giving a voice to the legitimate needs of children naturally evolved into becoming the co creator of leading edge parenting. She is an internationally acclaimed leader in the field of highly sensitive children and brings clarity, personal experience, and compassion for parents raising highly sensitive children. She is the co founder of Leading Edge Parenting, co author of Authentic Parenting Power, and author of the forthcoming book Under the Hood, a manual to understand the inner workings of children. She is known for helping parents and professionals understand children with high sensitivity and sensory processing disorder. And Melissa is a Stanford University alumna and a graduate of the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. She lives in San Diego, California, and coaches parents around the world. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you.
This is incredible because, as somebody, as people who both are really here in the world supporting the highly sensitive population, I'm so glad to know that that you're giving such support and leadership and expertise for the really as advocacy for highly sensitive children. Right.
Yeah,
This
absolutely.
this is really important. This is what I would have wanted as a child, right? And
Yeah.
why everything that I do regarding being sensitive and really understanding how it can really be the greatest asset that somebody has is really important. So tell us about your journey to what really brought you to be focusing in this important area of expertise that you're in at this moment in time.
Yeah. So sometimes people ask me, when did I start doing this work? And I say, I was born to do this work
Yes.
because I am the child of two school teachers. I grew up in New York. Both my parents were educators. My mom was an early childhood educator. And I have an older brother he's 4 years older than me. And he was born really easygoing. Everything in life worked for him. He didn't struggle a whole lot. He was kind of on a very clear path to career success. He was at Harvard Law School and just things always felt easy for him. I, on the other hand, never had an easy time. Things were always hard for me. Life always felt intense and overwhelming, and my emotions felt too big, and I didn't know what to do with them. And so in my very early years, my mom, who is my partner in business, when we speak together, she talks about how everything she did with my brother worked. She was an early childhood teacher. She went to Columbia Teachers College and got her master's degree. And so she knew what she was doing. And when I was born and she did the same things with me and they didn't work, she assumed something had to be wrong with me. Wow. It couldn't possibly be that something was different with me and that I needed different tools. And so as I got a little bit older, she started to learn a little bit more and realized that our hard wirings were just really different and that I was a more demanding, more challenging child, but it wasn't because something was wrong. And fast forward 20 something years, my brother moved out to California. I moved out to California after both of us kind of gone to college and went to grad school. And my parents moved out here. They both retired from their careers. And my mom started doing workshops for parents. And I would go with her just to be supportive, and she would talk about her experience raising these two very different children. And the parents in the audience would come up to me at the end and say, "You sound just like my child. Can I talk to you?" Because the parents that are going to parenting workshops have challenging kids. And there's no judgment when I say challenging. It's that some of us are hardwired to have bigger needs, to be more intense reactions to life, broader emotions. And so I actually started coaching parents because they asked for it. And several years into coaching, I discovered Elaine Aron's work, and she is, anybody who's listening who's not familiar with her, she's sort of the grandmother of the movement of high sensitivity. Yeah. And she's written many books. And when I read her book called The Highly Sensitive Person, it's like, oh, nothing's wrong with me. Yeah. I'm just highly sensitive. I just feel things deeper. I notice things that other people don't notice. I process in a different way. I'm more perceptive to things, and so I'm more affected by them. And so, as you were saying, I wish that there was somebody like me when I was growing up who could have advocated for me and had a voice for what was going on for me. And so that's what I do now. I advocate for these kids. I have the honor of working with parents who deeply want to help their children, who know that their kids need more than they can give them, and they're looking for help and support. And so I get to support them and give them tools and understanding to figure out why their children are behaving the way they are and how to meet their needs so that these kids can grow up feeling confident in their sensitivity, whole in their sensitivity. I was talking with some colleagues yesterday, and I said, sometimes when I'm feeling cheeky and people ask me what I do, I say I help parents raise kids that won't need to go to therapy. Because when sensitive children grow up feeling understood, they don't need to recover from their childhood in the same way that so many of us as now adults did. Yeah.
Melissa, so much good stuff here. And there's so many points I want to grab. One of them is, that this concept of hardwiring. And the reality that, we each have genetic encoding and what it does and what it's here to do. And there are those of us who study the genetic part of this and what predisposes one person to be functioning in a certain way and another person to be functioning in another way. For my whole life, I've just thought to myself, we're created in a certain way on purpose for a certain purpose. And so even this, this whole concept of however many generations of human beings where there has been this great sensitivity that has brought warmth and empathy into communities and tribes and whatever it was, along the way. But then this whole other side of it, which was, if you can't understand what it's like to feel that way, that intensity, then it overwhelms other people and they're afraid of it. And then it's all about, he's sensitive, she's sensitive. And for a long time, that was like a really judgmental thing. And it still is for some people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And I think it's judgmental because for two reasons. One, for the point that you just articulated, sometimes I like to explain being highly sensitive is sort of like being in Oz. We're in color, neon, purple, and non-highly sensitive people are in Kansas.
They are.
And how do you explain Oz to somebody who's never been there? How do you explain living in Technicolor to somebody who lives in a black and white and gray world?
Right.
It's very, very hard to share that. But sensitive people can sort of imagine what it would be like to remove the intensity. And often I think a lot of us wish that we could, when life is overwhelming, but it's really hard to explain to somebody that's never tasted it what it feels like. I think the other piece of it is that so many sensitive people grow up with these wounds, with this woundedness of feeling judged and shamed for being who we are and not being able to be different than who we are and not having the tools to handle who we are, that then we grow up in Oz wounded. And so our behavior continues to meet people who are saying, oh, well, you're too intensive, you're too reactive, you're so overwhelming, you're too big, you're too much. And so then we continue to kind of meet them where they are because we never got the tools that we needed to handle who we were.
I know. This is so true. And, I love this Oz example because it's not only that we're not only seeing Oz, we are in this full dimension. We're feeling Oz. Everything is fully dimensional. And you're not trying, for people that, this is an emotionally sensitive audience, but for people that may not quite understand, right, you don't even know that that's not the same for other people. So it's for a certain amount of your life, and either it's that you think everyone's like that, or you also think there's something wrong with you, which starts a whole identity crisis from the beginning. And then there's the hiding and the shame of it. And I'm thinking about a younger client of ours. He's 16 years old. And when I first started working with him, he was saying, and trying to really understand his history, because he developed multiple, let's just say, personality disorders that weren't really personality disorders. They were patterns of defenses that have just cemented themselves, this misbehavior, because he had gone through his life, and he said he was in school as a little one, and he was describing all the stimulus, all the kids, the fluorescent lights, everything. And he said he's went through all the way until he was in about ninth grade, not even thinking that he had to hide that he was like, that he was so different from everyone else. And so then he was acting in a certain way in order to try to fit in. And this was this ultimate trauma. You know, this is the trauma that people would normally be recovering from at like 35 years old.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the other piece of it is because sensitivity is genetic and it tends to be passed down. I know in my own family, my maternal grandmother, my maternal great grandmother were highly sensitive. I had the pleasure of knowing them. They were both alive for many years of my life. And they were so wounded. And, you know, now living through COVID, I'm thinking about my great grandmother who lived through, you know, the first pandemic 100 years ago, and how hard life had to have been for her, you know, growing up in New York City and dealing with all of these things. And I think what happens is not only does the sensitivity get passed down, but a lot of the woundedness gets passed down. The way that those wounded people dealt with being highly sensitive gets taught, it gets modeled for the next generation. And it really takes putting a spoke in the wheel and really saying, I'm going to do this differently. I'm going to change these patterns in order to really be able to do it. And I have to tell you, in my experience, an emotionally healthy, empowered, highly sensitive person is an unstoppable force in this world.
I know. I love this. This is exactly how I feel about it. And why, you know, out of all the different symptomology that people can have, I look at this whole thing going, you know, like you're talking about people that won't need to end up in therapy. I just remember being able to sort of pinpoint and boil this down and going, wait a minute, I have a feeling most people that end up in therapy in the first place are the highly sensitive population with all the wounding, with all the intensity and overwhelm that becomes anxiety. First, you're overstimulated, right? So anxiety, depression, all this reacting, all of this conditioning that ends up just having us on the roller coaster ride of life, right? Rather than being in the driver's seat. And I started to even, you know, I'm still in this question as an emotional scientist about just how many people are, that the whole therapy industry, I have a feeling, is really been built up around this is all about emotionally sensitive people's wounds and struggles, without the whole therapy industry actually recognizing that that's what's going on, and instead calling everything bipolar or depression or whatever, when the root of it is this overstimulation, or really what is our normal level of stimulation.
Sure. Yeah. And I think I would agree with you. I think a large percentage of people in therapy are highly sensitive people. And part of it goes back to that differentiated susceptibility, right? Yeah. So when we grow up in an environment that isn't nurturing and supportive and understanding, sensitive people are going to have a harder time than non-highly sensitive people. When we grow up in an environment that is supportive and nurturing and understanding, we're going to thrive beyond somebody who isn't highly sensitive. Right. So I agree. I think there are many highly sensitive people that grow up in environments that don't support them. And so those people probably end up in therapy because we can't handle the discomfort. Yeah. I personally know plenty of people that are not highly sensitive that are in therapy because they so want to learn and grow. But I think that non-highly sensitive people have a higher threshold for emotional discomfort because their emotions are not as broad or saturated or intense. And so they can handle getting through life and having these wounds. But highly sensitive people can't handle it. We're not meant to. We are meant to be emotionally healthy and whole and have this resilience and feel empowered in our lives, which is why therapy is so wonderful for highly sensitive people.
Yeah, well, you're having me think too, just about the chain of emotionally sensitive, the generations, the multi-generational emotional sensitivity, and so much here, because thinking about the challenges that can be there, even though it's full of opportunities, when it's repeated in the genetic chain first and foremost, before it's repeated
Yeah.
in like all the same emotional struggles. I think back to my dad, who is not with us anymore, but who inspired so much of what I do.
Mm.
And ultimately, he was an emotionally sensitive, highly driven person who had all of this. He could create lots of success, but he was, in that intensity all the time and very, very miserable in it. And
Mm.
also, as a male, conditioned as a male, trying not to let anybody know that. Right. And so he's able to pass on to me lots of great. So then I'm genetically very similar to him, and
Yeah.
I've got these traits that allow me to accomplish a lot. But I'm also multi-generationally experiencing something similar along the way, which was I'm also feeling this intensity. And so these two things, it's like, how does this work together? And not having the all the stuff that we are all doing now to bring this to light. My dad's is a life who represented the absolute epitome of success on one side and extreme suffering, and honestly a
Mm.
premature death from that. And so had he been able to, like so many of us from the beginning of life, to understood who he was, how he worked, and that he was so vital and important to his family and community because he could perceive things that other people couldn't, it would have been completely different. And I know that his story, our story, it's millions of people throughout history.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most highly sensitive people grow up knowing something's a little different and then looking for answers, kind of searching. I know for me personally, I've been on a spiritual path for many, many, many years.
Yeah.
I mean, in my early teenage years, I remember being exposed to Tibetan Buddhism. I went to a Tibetan freedom concert and saw these Tibetan monks, and I was like, whoa, what is this? And it totally inspired me. I ended up studying Tibetan studies and traveling to the Himalayas, and I felt so fortunate that I was able to find something outside of myself that brought some connection to something bigger. I think a lot of sensitive people are constantly looking for that. And fortunately nowadays with the internet and being so connected, it's a little bit easier to connect with other sensitive people, to know that you're not alone. I mean, when I look back on my life, my very best friend from childhood was not highly sensitive, and I never felt judged by her. In fact, she was like a perfect match for me. But then when I got to high school and made another really close friend who is highly sensitive, and the three of us kind of teamed up, we started to notice things. We'd bounce off of each other. So I think there's something really important about finding community, about finding connection to something outside of yourself that allows this mirroring back to see, okay, I'm not broken, I'm not flawed, there's nothing wrong here. It's so easy to kind of measure ourselves and compare ourselves to other people, and sensitive people are just unique. And I even want to say that within that, sometimes I'm asked questions about how to describe sensitivity with a broad brush. I don't think it's really possible. I'm an extroverted, sensation-seeking, strong-willed, highly sensitive person. I am not the norm when it comes to high sensitivity. I'm like a bull in a china shop, but I'm also deeply empathic and very compassionate. And so, sensitive people have to really come to understand who they are as these unique individuals without judgment or condemnation or, measuring, comparing. Because once we value all of these unique components that make up who we are, then we get to be of service to ourselves in the world. Then we get to go out and really shine.
This is so cool because I'm even thinking, Melissa, like, no, there is such a spectrum, which is why we also on our site have the emotional sensitivity assessment that to see like what type it, and there's so much of a range, but to kind of get a sense of how that is for people. And, I look at it too as some people are really highly sensitive and really like struggle with all aspects of functioning and really need, and it's very important that they have the support and get the support that they need. And then there's just a range of where there's different aspects of functionality that are really working and complementing sensitivity, and then some places where these things really need to be integrated, all these gifts of ours and the way that we process. And I think to myself, kind of threading through here, thinking about multi-generational sensitivity, because think about the challenges of, if you're an emotionally sensitive parent, a highly sensitive parent, and you're then have maybe even more than one highly sensitive child, and everybody's in intensity, and then does anyone ever go kind of get the help? And I think sometimes it like families just end up in so much dysfunction because some of them may not have been the type of people that would even see themselves getting this type of help for themselves, and then some people want it but think there's something wrong with them. So instead of having the sensitivity drive them to get more information about themselves, they can also be like, there's nothing wrong, because it feels so shameful to even deal with it. And like, you're going to tell me I've got mental illness or something.
Yeah. And I would add one more to that, which maybe some of what your dad experiences. Some people are successful. They're outwardly successful. And, I'm always wanting to redefine success. Is it having a lucrative career? Is it being famous? Is it being content in your soul when you lay your head on your pillow at night? But I work with a lot of families where one or more of the parents are, in terms of their career, financially successful, and maybe even well known in the industry. And then there's some ego that gets brought into it. Like, well, if I'm really good at my work, how can I be struggling over here? And there's a real humbling experience when your child needs more from you, when your child needs you to leave your professional persona at the door and come home and be mom or dad, and get vulnerable with them and be willing to hear them. Some of the clients that I work with, the hardest things that happen for them are when their kids say, you were mean to me, or I hate that I have a little brother or sister. Or, these deep truths that they're carrying around that are kind of at the root of a lot of their pain and their struggle. And so some parents, they have a hard time hearing those truths because they strike at their core of their own identity.
Yeah. This is so key, because in my upbringing as a sensitive being, wanting to connect with my dad as a sensitive being, which you would think that us sensitive beings would have that connection and kind of get it, but it can also create like a mirror of stuff that we don't want to see. Right. Yes. And somehow it's like, your intensity is overwhelming me, and now I feel intense. And there's all this, a lot of it is subconscious, obviously. And so we really need experts like you, Melissa, walking us through how do we do this? Because I also think of, over the years, as I would, in my career, I would work with people with lots of complex disorders. And when I would unravel everything, this is what I found at the core of it, is that they had always been sensitive. And that if I addressed that, and our team did, that all of these disorders were not really, they were not permanent. You could recondition them, because you could strengthen the person's capacity and really use it as an asset. But there came a point where I said, it will not be beneficial if I only work with the client. Even if they're 30 years old, if I don't work with the family system to actually get educated on this person will still be in a scenario that will potentially be too overwhelming for them to kind of lead their whole family through the emotionally sensitive, curriculum, so to speak.
Absolutely. Very often parents will reach out to me and they'll say, my child has all of these tantrums or can't handle school and is breaking down. How do you fix them? And I say,
welcome to my.
I'm not gonna do anything with your child. I'm gonna work with you.
Yep.
And in working with you, your child's behavior will change, because their behavior is communication about where they're struggling and needing more support.
Yeah.
Sometimes I say to parents, it's almost like we're playing pool, and I'm the cue stick, and the parent is the cue ball, and the child is the ball. And I have to go through the parent to reach the child, because the parents are the ones who are influencing what's going on for that child in so many ways. The other thing that's really interesting that I found in doing this work for over 10 years at this point is very often parents will come to me because their child is a big reactor or intense. It's always sort of the same challenges that they're experiencing. And in talking with the parents, we find out that one or both of the parents are actually highly sensitive, and they had shut it down, especially when it's the dads. I hate the stereotype. Most of the time, when the dad is highly sensitive, from a very early age, they got messages that it was not acceptable, not okay, turn it off, I don't want to hear it, toughen up, suck it up, man up, all these kind of awful messages that we give to young boys. And in working together, there is an opening. There is an honoring of who these people really are, and then they get to shine. So I always say to the parents, your child is actually catalyzing your own growth.
I know,
They're
love this.
actually helping you to come back to who you really are. Yeah.
Melissa, this is so important. I'm really inviting everybody to just really internalize all of this, because if you're emotionally sensitive, it may be that you have emotionally sensitive kids, or your partner might be, and you can now start to see things through the lens of this, not just on yourself, right, but what is happening around you. And I think about the same thing, because when you really look at what goes into the development of something that might end up as a classified mental health disorder, where it could be, patterns of depression, anxiety, or lots of, ADD is a big one for emotionally sensitive people. The more highly sensitive people end up having lots of physical symptoms, right? Sensitive stomach, they're sensitive to chemicals, they have a variety of sensitivities. And, this really important aspect of having families recognize that there needs to be a change in the environment, the emotional environment. And to your point, Melissa, this is a good thing for everybody, right? This is good that everybody's going to become actually more sensitive than they might have been, because they're just becoming more aware and connected. And you're making a family environment that everyone can reside in, which I have a feeling this is what you're doing with people all the time, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And when I work with families that have multiple children, and maybe one is highly sensitive and one or two are not, or vice versa, what I say to the parents is what we give you for your sensitive child will also work with your non-highly sensitive child. In other words, the sensitive child needs more, and that more is not going to be too much for your non-highly sensitive children. But what you're giving to your non-highly sensitive children is not enough for your highly sensitive child. That child is needing more. So when I work with parents and coach them around their sensitive children, what they learn is of benefit to everybody in the home, not just the sensitive one.
Well, and this is where I think of, I feel like I have a general sense that especially over the last, 10 years or more, maybe 20 years, as we all know, in the age of technology, we've become there's more stimulus to react to. There's just more stimulation, energetic, everything, all the communications and impulses in the world. And depending on your level of sensitivity, the most highly sensitive people can feel everything. They can feel, the Wi-Fi. They can feel a multitude of things and be impacted by it without really knowing what it is. It could be really so many different things. And in that age of stimulus, more and more stimulus, it makes sense to me that more and more people are having more health issues, which I just put them all together, whether it's anxiety, depression, all types of overwhelm and shutdown, and then developing defense patterns and coping strategies. Something's going on around in my office building here. And then just developing these strategies without even realizing it, where they're tantruming is a defense strategy, right? Yeah. All of this stuff. And so when I help families like you do, and I think what we do is either very similar or very complementary, or we're, and we tend to work with people that are older. However, teaching a family non-reactive connectivity, right, and sensitive, it's a game changer for everything they do, because a lot of people are walking around in the world without realizing that they are reactive. And until you have an emotionally highly sensitive person or child kind of react to you, you may have gone around offending all kinds of people without realizing it, you know? Is
Absolutely.
that what you
Yeah.
find, Melissa?
Yeah, I think living with somebody who's highly sensitive, they're like a canary in the coal mine. They are kind of forcing you to become more mindful, forcing you to become more present to how you're moving through the experience, because their tolerance is so thin. Sometimes I talk a lot in metaphor with my clients. It's the way that I process information, and especially with parents. It helps to be a little emotionally removed from the challenge that they're experiencing. But sometimes people will say to me, we need some new coping strategies. And I often say to them, like, is that what you really want? How about tools? Because I often think about a coping strategy, like, for example, if somebody was allergic to strawberries and they ate them, the coping strategy would be taking the Benadryl so that the allergic reaction doesn't spiral out of control. For me, a tool is don't eat the strawberry. And I think there are many highly sensitive people that are coping, and then they often will turn outside of themselves to social media, alcohol, sugar, unhealthy relationships. In other words, shopping. I mean, there's so many ways that we can kind of numb ourselves to what we're feeling that are coping mechanisms. When I hear self-care is like a big buzzword these days too. And when I hear people say, like, take a warm bubble bath, I'm like, really? Is that what we're doing to take care of ourselves? Like, if I'm pulling my hair out at the end of the day, is a bubble bath what I need? Or do I need some tools so that when I start my day tomorrow, I'm more grounded, I'm more present, I'm more calm, I'm more balanced, I'm more whole, I'm less reactive. To me, the tools are what are so important. And it takes a little more work. You have to put in some more energy. But as I always say to parents, you can put in the energy before your child has the tantrum, or you can put in the energy to stop the tantrum and calm them down. Where do you want to focus your energy? For sensitive adults, it's the same thing. Do you want the tool to prevent the overwhelm and that burnout, that stress, that depression, the anxiety, or do you want to cope with it on the back end? Wow. I'm not telling people what to do. I know for me, having the proactive tools so that I'm aware when I'm reaching an overwhelm, that I can do something to calm my nervous system, that I become more tuned into my body and sensations. And when you were talking about the fluorescent lights in school, I was thinking that people clicking their pens used to drive me crazy when I was in a classroom.
I know.
And nowadays, when I'm someplace, pre-COVID, I'd work from coffee shops a lot to write and things like that. When I hear those stimulations, I put in headphones. I leave the room. I make a request. I'm sure maybe you didn't notice that pen clicking is actually really affecting my concentration level. Yeah. And I do something about it rather than waiting for the overwhelm, having an adult tantrum, which lots of us have, and then being labeled reactive, crazy, too sensitive, too intense. Yeah. None of those things are true. And so having the tools to take care of yourself on the front end is so much more empowering. It's such a freer way to move through life.
Well, it's so connected and it's so intentional. And I love this for everyone because I think back to something, it's been in the last year, somebody asked me a question about coping or something like that as well. And I just remember thinking, do you want to be coping with life? Because this is also part of the industry issues that go on is like we're teaching coping strategies, and like coping strategy right there puts you in a place of defensiveness. And I love this because you're basically talking about doing a reactive process. Like I'm going to react and then have a reactive process to it after the fact, rather than recognizing that you're in charge, you are empowered to stay in an intentional connected state. And when there are things that come up, I love this example, somebody's clicking the pen, that you're also not a victim to everything. And that, so all the things that you can do ahead, then you're connected and intentional. And then if you're not proactive in it and building it sounds like what you do, Melissa, also, you're conditioning people to have new ways of doing things so that they are not essentially living a reactive life. And this is where we're really aligned, you and I, because sometimes you might need to respond and mention this pen clicking example. I'm so with you. And just ask for what you want. And then sometimes you have so much of the time, so much proactive ability to create the reality that you want, the outcomes that you want. And so you're not only teaching people the tools, but you're helping them to understand how to define them so that they don't have a language that is all around sort of like a victim mentality of like being sensitive instead of it being a gift that it is.
Absolutely. And I know for me, growing up, again, before I had the language to identify that I was sensitive or I could really recognize what was different about me, I often felt victimized by the world. Like the world wasn't set up for me. And what I learned as an adult is the world isn't set up for me. And that's okay. And I can bring what I need to the world so that I can be okay in the world. There's a real turnaround in that. It's much more empowering to know that I don't need the world to change for me to be okay to be in it. That's what I think sensitive people really need to hear is, the world isn't set up for you. It's not. And there's nothing wrong with it. Yeah. And you don't need the world to cater to your every need in order for you to be okay. You can actually advocate for yourself. You can take care of yourself. You know, again, pre-COVID, I would travel a lot to do public speaking, and I hate airplanes. I hate the smell. And I used to be really triggered by it. And so I started bringing an orange with me, and I would peel it, or I would bring some essential oils, like a little tiny thing that I could bring on the plane and smell it that was calming, that I had, kind of linked into my meditative practice. So when I'd smell it, it would really tell my nervous system, like, you're okay, you can calm down here. In other words, I'm not going to change what airplanes smell like. Yeah. That's what they smell like. And if I'm going to travel and have the career that I want to have, I need tools. There's nothing wrong with me for needing those tools. I just needed to figure out what they were so that I could be okay in that environment.
This is major, everyone. I really want to invite our emotionally sensitive audience, to recognize this, because I've looked at this before where as I recognized this about myself and knew that even as a young person, the therapist that I'd gone to, and even into my young 20s, I just knew there was something that they didn't understand, and they never spoke this language to me at all. And it wasn't anywhere. And I just remember thinking what I knew at the time was that people in my family were reactive. I knew that my dad was, again, somebody I love more than words will ever define. And I just knew that this reactivity was an issue. And I knew that I was reactive. I could just be so successful in certain things and then just lose my shit and just be in a cycle that I could not stop. And so in taking and really going, you know what? This is something for me to understand. This is how I am, and I want to understand how this is meant to work. I remember thinking I don't think other people who can feel, this 5D, 3D Oz feeling. And so I thought it's either going to be that people keep kind of, in some ways, crucifying people who are less sensitive and being like, you need to be more sensitive, right? And really crucifying, and then they're even more scared. Or that us empathic people were going to build out a lifestyle for ourselves that was not, Melissa, about so much of the empath community is all about how I create boundaries and avoid everything. And I remember thinking, to your point, I have a big life to live. I have places I want to see and things I want to do. And so what's the infrastructure for me and people like me? How do I create that? And you're really speaking to that, and from an early age, most importantly.
Yeah. Because when we have these tools from an early age, we don't ever have to grow up feeling that we don't have those tools. Yeah. I think so many sensitive adults struggle, because I also work with some highly sensitive adults. It's interesting. When people come to me for coaching, not around their children, they're usually in their 50s, 60s, even 70s. Yeah. And sometimes I think, what do I have to help? What do I have to share with these people? But what they're really looking for are tools for their inner child. For that wounded inner child that never got the understanding and the support that it needed in order to be able to handle life as an adult. Yeah. And so these children that get to grow up with parents who recognize they need more and are willing and able to give it to them, these children are so fortunate. They don't even know how fortunate they are, because they don't ever have to taste that disconnection from their true selves.
And having the world, you're really having the world ultimately feel threatening is how I see it, right? The intensity just feels like that. It can feel threatening if nobody understands it. I really relate to this too. I remember being a kid going, I'm able to perceive, I don't know what I called it inside myself, but I think so many of us were like, I'm really aware of what's going on. I'm not quite sure. Are these adults understanding what's going on?
Yeah.
I know I'm not in the position of power, and it also, for a lot of people, right? We're the stuff that we might be saying, like, this hurts me, or it's not welcome. And because, to your earlier point, Melissa, it taps on the adults or the parents' own some sense of shame that they should be somehow experts on this stuff when nobody gets any parenting training unless they do something like with you. And so, right, there's just this whole way in which life was threatening. And I can track, because we do have a lot of people in between their like 30s all the way to their 60s, and some people into their 70s. And when I go through this list of what has happened in their life, Melissa, it is, fortunately, all of their brilliance has taken them in some good direction. And then there is also this kind of littered path, like the roughest road ever. And they're still going, wait a minute, I've got another maybe 40, 50 years maybe. And how am I going to make it through this whole second half? I'm burnt out and exhausted. And it's because they've been in a defensive position since childhood.
Yes. They've coped their way through life, and coping only gets you so far. And let me say, there are times where coping is the best that we can do. There are times where, we find ourselves in a situation that's just hard. We're human. Being a human is hard, especially these days where, life is so
chaotic,
fraught with chaotic, and there's so much fear and uncertainty and instability, and sometimes the best we can do is cope. But when we make that our A plan, we're in big trouble. That's got to be our backup plan. That's got to be in our back pocket, not our go-to.
This is such a huge quotable right here, right? Coping is not a life strategy, right? It is the B plan for when the strategy needs a little, extra flavor to it. But you really hit it, Melissa. Thank you so much for helping us all understand this, that you have coped your way through life. And that coping strategy is going to get harder and harder because you're tired now. You have burnt out. Your system is burnt out. You have lots of symptomology that may look like, and then people go down this path of like, I'm over here on the ADD plan, and I'm over here on the leaky gut plan, and I'm over here on every 17 disorders, medications, doctors. Now you have a massive map out of a treatment team, and still your sensitivity is not being addressed. And having the tools that, Melissa, you're talking about, and the emotional training process that I feel like we both do with a lot of alignment and similarity, and I know it's geared so much, it's geared toward parents and kids. And I invite everybody to really, we're going to give you the information about Melissa, how you can get in touch with her, because an entire life where minus this coping means preventative medicine all the way around for everything, diseases of every kind, divorce, financial dysfunction, and there's not anything that this doesn't touch, because this is the emotional sensitivity of a person. So coping is not a strategy.
Yeah. There, as you're talking about these disorders that sometimes get misidentified in sensitive people, there's one that I wanted to add that I see a lot with the children that I work with, which is oppositional defiance disorder.
This is it.
And I mean, I'm sort of surprised I wasn't diagnosed with it as a child. Fortunately, my parents understood me as best as they could growing up. But in my experience, the strong-willed, rebellious, power-seeking, extroverted, highly sensitive children, they can look like they have ODD when they're living with an attempt at discipline that doesn't honor their personal empowerment.
Exacerbates
and
it. Exacerbates it.
It exacerbates
Yeah.
it. And I can't even tell you how many families I've worked with that had an ODD diagnosis when they came to me. And I'm like, let's just put that on the side for now. Let you try a couple of the things, but I'm going to give you a couple of these tools, and let's see if that ODD fades away. And I have not worked with one family that had an ODD diagnosis that didn't do what we talked about, where it didn't just melt away, because the defiance is that child crying out for empowerment, crying out to be understood and to have rules and boundaries that make sense to them. So ODD is one of those other diagnoses to me that when I hear it, I think something else is going on here.
This is essential for everybody to get this, like, because everybody either has kids or has kids in their family, and this is a real issue that's going on in our culture where kids are being diagnosed this way. And then, just so we all know, they end up when this goes further and they're not understood or given the appropriate support and guidance, and the family system is needing it, because they're going to be together for the end of time, hopefully, right? This is going to be your 40-year-old child. Like, you want to understand this. Otherwise, what happens is these disorders develop at their worst into things like antisocial personality disorder, and lots of personality disorders here, which people don't often understand, that those personality disorders are based in sensitivity. And these were all the cries for help, the coping strategies, and they get cemented into what seems like the person's personality. And then that gets reinforced. You're being a bad boy, bad girl, whatever it is. And then this may sound very extreme, but having dealt with these cases, this is where we end up with people in prison systems and all of it, constantly in the addiction, rehab track. And this is very, very key to identify. And I'll add this one last part on this, Melissa, is that having worked with somebody in this last year who was basically had transitioned from ODD to antisocial personality disorder, and all the bad stuff that was going on, all the stuff with the law, this young man had been in that same position, and people like you were not there along the way. And the parents didn't know what the hell to do. And he was stronger than them, by the way. He was more strong-willed than them. And so when we started to do this emotional training and build in techniques and understanding that, no, you're not this disorder, you're actually very sensitive, and this is going to be your greatest asset. You just talked about it melting away. What really is happening, right, is that all of the real self of the person gets to be available to them, and all of these other defenses, they're essentially retiring and fading out.
Yeah, I love that. They retire.
They're retiring.
Yeah.
And so I as somebody who does, we help a lot more adults than we do, and we have a certain age cutoff that we do. And Melissa, and you're at leading edge parenting. This is so important that we don't wait, everyone, until we have all this pathology later, and all that time is wasted, resources, because this stuff needs to be addressed either way. And it's either going to be when the person is at a developmental place that they can thrive through this training, or they're going to have to later kind of as you said, recover and rebuild themselves, rather than building developmentally with what it is that you do in the youngest stages of life.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I say to parents, because I work with parents that have children as young as 2, 3, 4, and parents come to me, school age, teenagers. I once worked with a client whose daughter was 40. Okay. So there's really no limitation to this. But what I always say to parents is, no matter how wounded your child may be, no matter what's already gone on for them, it's never too late, because the woundedness is actually what gives us our passion in life. I know for me, if I was perfectly understood in childhood and given all of these tools from a very, very, very early age, I wouldn't be doing the work I do. I do this work because I didn't have it, and I wasn't so deeply wounded that I developed a personality disorder, that I was, in the throes of despair and depression. I struggled, as most people do.
Because there's a range of what happens. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I always want parents to know that they haven't ever done anything that is so awful that their children can't not just recover from, but use as growth and as fodder to now have a purpose and passion in life in their adulthood.
Oh my gosh, Melissa, so key, so important. I'm so excited about this. This is so key because this keeps parents from getting help, right?
Yeah,
Because part of the guilt that drives all this and the
yeah,
embarrassment. I mean, I've talked to so many parents of also much older adults who all the reasons along the way that they didn't get help was because they felt shame. They should know how to do this, but we don't come with a handbook for being a human, and we don't come with a handbook for
yeah,
being highly sensitive or knowing how to have a great relationship with any highly sensitive person in your life, let alone your own child or raising one. I mean, and this is why people like us are in the field bringing this forth out of, just furthering this work, because one of the most challenging parts of this issue is it brings about this interesting back asswards coping strategy of not doing anything.
yes,
Avoidance is one of the worst parts of this kind of dispositional set of stuff. And we want to
totally.
go right at it, knowing that you're all going to be empowered. And this, I'm really encouraging you all to check out what Melissa's doing. Um, and Melissa, any more you want to say about that? And then also, please tell us, where do you want people to be able to find you in these services?
Yeah, no, I think you summed it up in a very
Okay.
pretty little bow. So I
Okay.
will leave that there. So the best way to find me is at leadingedgeparenting.com. And I am on Facebook. I have a private Facebook group for parents of highly sensitive children where they can join and get free support and connect with other parents and know that they're not alone in their challenges and struggles. And I often pop in there and offer feedback and guidance for people that have questions. And the thing that's so amazing about that group is that one person will pose a question and they may feel timid or hesitant to share it. And then hundreds of parents say, I'm in that same boat with you.
Oh,
And there's something really wonderful about knowing that you're not alone in the challenges that you're experiencing and getting feedback from other people from what they've done, what's worked, and then getting to hear from professionals. My mom's also in the group and offers support too.
this is great. And I just love this for all of this audience. I love this for the world because we're here to bring forth all of this amazing power that we have, and empathy, and perceptual ability, intuition. This is an amazing population that we are a part of, and it's really great to give ourselves these voices, and to really develop, what we both know is an incredible superpower that is still only understood to a small degree. We're still scratching the
Yeah.
surface. And this is the time in our world where we need the most emotionally sensitive and empowered people driving our society and its outcomes. We are all really needed. And your children, if your children are struggling, you're struggling in your family, know that your children are here to grow up and be incredible leaders that are just very empathetic people, but also very, very capable and strategic. So, Melissa, one last question that I ask
Yeah.
on the show of everyone, and I'm just collecting these wonderful answers. And I want to have you share with us that if for some strange magical reason this was your last moment that you could give your message to the world, and this would be the message that we would all carry forth from you, and know that this is what Melissa taught us, and we have this in our life for generations to come. What would that message be?
Yeah. It would be that sensitivity is actually strength. Being highly sensitive and empowered and grounded, rooted in that sensitivity, requires immense strength and confidence and inner knowing. And the world as we know it right now is so lacking in compassion and kindness and care for others. And this is the time for highly sensitive people to get their acts together and get on a global stage, because the world is asking for it. And we are the ones who can really bring about the change that's so needed right now.
Sensitivity is strength, and so let's all get our act together, right, and get our voices out there. So,
Yeah.
Melissa, thanks for being with us today. I'm just
Thank
so
you.
excited for everyone to just take all of this perspective and these tools into yourself, into your heart, and apply them with all your incredible gifts. And between now and then, just grow that emotional sensitivity into the greatest gift that it really is and share it with the world. All right, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Take care.